Hello, Deanna here, and thanks so much for being here. So today's video is a book review, and the book I will be reviewing is Lore by Alexandra Bracken. So I'm going to go ahead and read a blog post summary that I have written. Melora Perseous, known as Lore, has done something not many of her ancestors have done. She found a way to escape the Agon. The Agon is a hunt that occurs every 7 years for 7 days. And what exactly are people hunting? Well, it started with the original 9 Greek gods: Poseidon, Artemis, Athena, Apollo, Dionyssus, Aphrodite, Ares, Hermes, and Hephaestus, more than 200 cycles ago, as a form of punishment from Zeus. During the hunt, the gods lose their immortality and can be hunted down by bloodline descendants, and if killed by a mortal's hand, their powers are passed to that person and the hunt continues. Lore has gotten out, though, after a ghastly murder, and she wants nothing to do with the hunt and all it represents. That is until a visit from someone she thought dead, and the goddess Athena appears on her doorstep asking for assistance. In this incredible take on Greek mythology, Lore finds herself pulled back into the hunt she thought she left behind. Is this Lore's chance to end the hunt once and for all, or will her mortal life be one of countless lost along the way? Can we ever truly escape the fates? So I was intrigued by this book. I think first I was just fascinated by the cover, because as you can see, that has a gorgeous cover with the look of Medusa there and the way the lore, and it's like the O's surrounding the eye there. Like, I absolutely love this cover, and I was drawn to it so much. And then there's like other little art. You can see like the Gorgon there and Medusa. There's little maps as well in this book there. And we also get a bit of like some little kind of index, a bit as you will, of who's who and what's what. So it's very, very nicely done. Like, it's a very, very nice, appealing book, I think, aesthetically, in a way. Like, even some of the just way that they separate like the different parts, there's like 5 parts to this book, and just even just some of those little touches are really well done in this book to really just bring the whole production of this book really nicely together. As you see, I have a nice hard copy, so it is just a really nice looking book, and I do like it because it's, in ways, it's very simple, but it's so well done as well. Like, I love the raised writing here. Like, for the hardcover, they did do a really good job on this. So I was definitely drawn to it for that alone. And then also because I am always intrigued by Greek mythology. I've always just been interested in the Olympus gods and some of the stories and the myths. So something like this, having it like a modern way that the gods are entwined into the here and now, was really an interesting take on the Olympus gods and the myths. So I just really wanted to read this, get my hands on it. I also really wanted to know really what was Lore's situation. Like, I love that name for one thing, like Melora, and then her name is Lore. Like, that's just so cool in so many ways because of the take on what the word lore means, and how it pretty much means like lore and mystery and kind of stories and ancient myths and things like that. So there was that. That was a really fun play on that word and making it her actual nickname. And then I also really wanted to know, why was Athena reaching out to her? Like, what was kind of going on? I wanted to just even know what is happening with this whole hunt, and like who all these players are and what's all going on with all these different bloodlines. Like, it was just a really interesting story, really interesting like background and a bit of world building going on in just making this a great story. So I was very intrigued by all of that. I was also very interested in finding out some of what happened to Lore to bring her to where she is now, because now we're going to be starting another hunt, but 7 years earlier something happened and there's a lot of mystery surrounding that, and so I just really wanted to know what was going on with that as well. I would say that this book is classified as YA or young adult contemporary fantasy. Like, it's not full-on fantasy, or at least it would be low-grade fantasy because it's taking place in our world, in our time, in modern life, but we're not like super drawn out with all of the different stories, because I think Alexandra Bracken, while she weaved in a lot of kind of letting us know what god is what, like what is Artemis the god of, and playing on to like what maybe her powers are, and like what is the god of Athena and what are her powers. It's not like she had to build this whole story though, because the Greek gods are pretty well known, so she was able to just weave it into the story, just kind of like reminding us of like, oh, Hermes, he's the messenger god, like don't forget about him, and things like that. So I think that helped to kind of just focus on what we're more talking about right now, instead of having to give us a whole lot of backstory to like really make up all of this whole world. I found that Alexandra had a very decent writing style though. I mean, it is a YA, so it's very fast paced, it's very nice to read, it was pretty like quick and easy to read, and the story really did just like keep me engaged. So she did have a good writing style, in my opinion. It was fairly easy to follow, and I think that's really saying something, considering it is such a huge cast of characters, especially when we're getting into the Olympus gods and just, you know, 200 plus years of like this hunt going on. It could really be easy to get lost in a lot of different characters, especially since anytime an individual kills a god, they're taking on their powers and then they're becoming like the new god. So it could be very easy to be like, who is who and what is what, and there were probably a couple times when I was like, who's that again? But I think one, she did write it really well so that she was able to kind of remind us sometimes, or even just give us like a little blurb of who it was without going too far back and like info dumping essentially. But also the little index at the front here really helped too. Sometimes I would flip back and be like, okay, which one was that again? So that was really nice, because if not, I think it would have been a lot of info dumping to keep telling us like who this was and how they did that and and how they're all connected. So it was nice that she had like that bit of that history there in that little index just to kind of tell us in that summary. We also have this as a third person story. It's not a first person, which can be something that does happen a lot in YA. Instead, this is a third person narrative, but we're really following along Lore. So even though we're not quite in her head and it's not like her saying like, I did this and I did that, like first person narratives will be, we still got a bit of insight into her and her thoughts, and we were primarily focused on her, and so we were learning things as the reader as she was learning them as well. Now, just speaking of our main protagonist, Lore, what I found was really interesting about this one was in a lot of especially Greek mythologies and YA stories, a lot of times we are having our main protagonist be someone that doesn't know that these myths are real. Like they're learning about, maybe they already have some knowledge of like who the Greek gods are, but they have no idea where they fit into it, and they're like exposed to this whole new world. Whereas in Lore's case, she already knew. She grew up in it. She grew up being raised in it. She knew all about how the gods were actually real, how they walked among mortals once every 7 years, and that she was trained pretty much her whole life to participate in the hunt someday. Like that was her main goal, was to one day get honor and glory by being a participant in the hunt. And that's like what this book has so much of, that theme of just like family and like your bloodlines and what you're raised like, and the honor that comes with like dying in battle and being a warrior. So Lore very much had this warrior-like mentality. So she's not meek or mild. She comes as a pretty strong character who knows how to wield a weapon because she was raised doing it. One of my favorite characters that I saw though was her human best friend that she found in the mortal world, and that was Miles. Now, Miles, to me, for some reason, I had this picture in my head of Milo from Atlantis, and I'll go ahead and put him on the screen if you don't know who that is. But from the Disney movie Atlantis, there's the main character Milo, and for some reason while reading this story, that's somehow who slotted into like the role of Miles. I don't know why. I don't even know if the author even mentioned that Miles had glasses or anything, or like what his appearance really was like, but that's almost like who my mind pictured when I thought of Miles. And maybe it's because, like, much like Atlantis, we've got a bit of a person who's kind of out of their element a bit. They're in with this group of like people who know what they're doing, and he's kind of like the one who essentially almost gets bullied in some ways because he's like the unblooded, and he's the one that's like, he's the mortal and he shouldn't be here and he's gonna get himself killed, and like they're kind of like taking him for granted, not realizing how fierce and loyal and protective he is of Lore, and just like how much he loves Lore. So like I found that was a wonderful way of like having some humanity in this book, because this book is filled with like bloody things and like unfeeling, like cold, calculated gods and goddesses that just are killing each other and things like that. And then you had like Miles that brought a bit of like the real world to Lore to help balance it out. I really actually wish we had seen more of him, and especially since in some ways it could just be like, oh, he's the token gay best friend almost. But I think if he had really been fleshed out just a little bit more, we really could have had like a lot more of a storyline for Miles, and just really like he wasn't in the book as much as maybe I would have loved to see him. And then of course, speaking of Laura's best friends, we also have her childhood best friend Castor that she talks about, and that's Castor Achilles, I believe. Achilles is his name. He's like the Achilles bloodline, which is really interesting because if you haven't seen, I did go ahead and do Song of Achilles, and I think just having Song of Achilles kind of led me to read more Greek mythology, and that's what kind of ended me up reading the lore. So it's really funny that the Song of Achilles, who has our main characters there, Patroclus and Achilles, is something that led me to this book, and one of our main characters, and just one of the better characters I think in, again, like Miles in terms of compassion and kindness and things like that, is our character Castor. So he's kind of keeping that side for Lore as well, especially since Lore can be a bit of a hard character. Of course, she's got quite the backstory that you learn as she goes on, but she can be pretty like, she has that mentality almost of growing up in this world of like almost being brutal and harsh sometimes. Like she kind of has a bit of that. I think she has some underlying kindness, but she's supposed to be like the bad character almost. Like she's the one that like got Castor into trouble sometimes and stuff like that, but Castor like kept her grounded and showed her love and compassion, and really I think kind of softened her edges so that she could be friends with someone like Miles and have a good friendship with Miles, who is a human. Because if Lore maybe didn't have Castor, maybe she wouldn't be so kind to humans and things like that if Laura didn't have some of the background, because humans are looked at like as just kind of fodder in a lot of way by a lot of the bloodlines. So Laura having such a wonderful connection with Miles, I think really came from her friendship with Castor. Unfortunately, I couldn't really get a good picture of what Castor looked like in my head. Like I got flickers, not like Miles. Miles, like I had, like that's what Miles looks like. Whereas Castor, he seemed to change a bit, especially the more we learned about him and the more that kind of came out and was revealed about him throughout the story. So it was definitely interesting learning more about Castor. And there was so many twists and turns within this story too. Like this story kept me guessing. It kept me kind of wondering, who can Laura even trust? Like by the end of reading this, I didn't trust anybody or anything. Like there is no one or nothing that I trusted in regards to what was going on with Laura. Like even Laura herself sometimes, because some of these gods have powers where they can like make you do things or make you see things and stuff like that. So it was sometimes just like, okay, what is real? What's going on? Like what is happening in this book? So I did find by the end of it, Alexandra did do a great job of like keeping me in suspense and keeping me guessing of like what is happening, and like, and not in a way where I was just like, okay, I don't even understand what's going on. Of course there was some of that while you're trying to piece all the puzzles together, put all the pieces of the puzzle together, but it wasn't in a way of like, I don't get it. It was more of like, oh my god, what next? What next twist is coming? What other like we're gonna get as a little plot twist or a person betraying someone else? Like what else is going on? I also really enjoyed some of the flashbacks that we got. So in this, we have sometimes chapters that are headed as 7 years earlier, and it's essentially when Laura is 10 years old, and it's taking us back to when she's only 10 and kind of some of the things that happened back then during the last Agon. And it kind of gives us a bit of more of a picture of Laura too. And I think sometimes when you do flashbacks in books, sometimes they can be really jarring because it can be like, okay, whoa, what's going on? But I think in some ways this one was like really well done, where it just, especially since the flashbacks weren't like super big or super long or anything like that, it was essentially moments when it was just like, okay, this little scene happened, to give us a bit more understanding of kind of maybe why Laura's reacting this way, or what Laura thinks, or kind of just what has happened in her life. So overall, I actually really did enjoy reading this story. I did enjoy the story and the characters. For me even, I think I enjoyed the characters so much that I wanted to see more of them. I think some of them could have been a little more fleshed out. We could have gotten a little more like interactions with Laura. I mean, I understand there are pretty much, it's 7 days of them like on the run practically, trying to figure out what's going on, like trying to find each other. Like it's a hunt, right? Like it's like a horrible game of hide and seek where you really don't want to be sought out because you probably might get killed. But it was understandable that she had to keep on guard and she had to keep going and things like that. But sometimes I just wanted like almost a bit more of like, I don't know, just personable interaction with some of the people that she cared about, and especially her best friends and things like that. Sometimes I found they were gone for quite a few scenes, or things were happening where it was just like, oh, I kind of wish we could have seen them. But I understand for the story why we couldn't. It's just I would have loved to get to know them a little better. One of my gripes, I will say, was a little bit of how jarring it could be sometimes, how flip-floppy the attitudes of the characters sometimes could be, especially some of our like secondary characters that we didn't really see as much, and we would have them in one scene being like very determined and like, this is my thoughts and this is what I think and da 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 da, and then maybe something would happen, or like we'd see them in the next scene that they were in and suddenly their stance was completely different, or their opinion was different or something. So that was sometimes a little jarring to read, especially since sometimes it was like, honor or die, and then it was like, oh, okay, yeah, we're cool now. Like it was just like a bit what? Like they did quickly change their minds sometimes, but I think that just was overall the whole play of like, who do we trust, and like what is going on, and like who can we have an allegiance with, an alliance with, and like, wow, it was just, I think it just very much added to the overall hunt of this story. So for me personally, I would love to read another one of Alexandra Bracken's stories. I would love to get my hands on another different book of hers to really get a better idea of her actual writing style, because where I really enjoyed this book, I'm very easy to sway when it comes to Greek mythology, especially when it's done right, and she did this one. I enjoyed this one. I enjoyed this take on the Greek gods and like kind of making them human, but not. Like I found that really cool, because you've got these cold, calculated, vicious gods, like I said, but they're like stuck in human mortal form. So in some ways, I think it almost could have been like more comedic in some ways, but it's a pretty like brutal, like trigger warning sometimes, because there's some brutality and the violence in this. And there's like, when you go into Greek mythology, sometimes the stories back then could be very brutal. Like some of your stories of Greek gods are like just not for kids sometimes, of like the themes and kind of what happens, like especially like things like sexual assault and stuff like that, and lack of consent and things like that tended to happen sometimes in Greek mythology, and it's sprinkled a little bit in here. So I just do want to warn anyone that maybe is picking this up, that while we're not, this is definitely a more modernized take, and we're not like completely going back and looking at all of those old myths. Some of that behavior might be throughout this story, so just kind of keeping an eye on that. I mean, this is stories where they would like marry off their 12-year-old daughters and like stuff like that, so there might be kind of some mentions of things like that as well. So just to kind of give you a warning about it, but really to me it speaks like that is what it was like back then in a lot of ways. That was the myths and the legends, and it's just bringing it to a more modern era, and you get to see Lore, who doesn't really want to put up with that, right? Like that's not how you treat women, that's how women should be treated. So you kind of got that take from Lore as well. So as I said, as I was kind of saying, I want to see what maybe some of her other stories are like, because this one was so much like about Greek mythology, and it was a YA writing style, so it's really easy to get like captured and like just taken up in a book like this and really enjoy it. So I'd love to like kind of reflect on what maybe some of her other, and compare them to some of her other writings to see like if this is an author that I really enjoy. But overall, I really did enjoy this one. I feel like for me, it's more of a 4 out of 5. It's almost a 5 out of 5 for me. I will admit, like it's pretty close. I think it's just some of the like lack of like seeing some more of the characters that I really wanted to see, and like I think some of the situations that happened, without getting too spoily, it was almost like I said, there was such flip-floppiness in some of the characters, and while that kind of added to that under layer, it also sometimes was just a bit like, okay, well, all right, I guess we're just moving on from that. So that to me is what brought it down to a 4 out of 5. But other than that, I absolutely enjoyed this book. It is definitely a great read. I'm glad that I did read it, and I did enjoy Lore and Castor and Van and Miles. I really did enjoy that whole group. Again, I wish I'd seen more of them, and I think that might be something to say to Alexandra's writing. It's either she clearly didn't flesh out her characters enough, and some people might take it as that stance, or it's she had such good characters that I wanted more of them. I wanted to see them more and give them a little bit more center stage attention. So that's kind of the two ways you could maybe take that. I take it more as wanted to know them more. I wanted to see more of them, and I think it was well done overall. It was a really good story. So maybe in a future video, you'll catch me giving a review of a different Alexandra Bracken's book. So if that happens, definitely check back to check that out. So that's it. That's 4 out of 5 stars for me for Lore. So that's gonna be it for me. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. As usual, I'm gonna have my blog post. I'll link it in the description below so that you can watch that if you're interested. Other than that, that's all I've got to say. So thanks for watching. I appreciate it. If you liked the video, give it a like. I appreciate it. If you read Lore and you liked it, let me know below. I love hearing your comments. I love just hearing what books you're reading, what books you love and enjoy, as that's why I do what I do here, is I just want to hear about what you're loving and get some discussions going about books. So thank you so much for your time. I hope you're having a wonderful rest of your day, night, evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Thank you so much for being here. Take care of yourselves, and you will see me next time.